Good evening. This is Ruth L. Snyder joining you from Bonnyville, Alberta, Canada. I'm happy that you are joining us tonight, and I have a few other people with me. So I am going to do a reading. We're supposed to have Skip Mondragon to be our feature tonight, but he's not here yet. But I see Julie is here. So after I'm done my reading, I'm going to bring Julie on, and maybe we'll do her interview tonight because she can't be with us tomorrow. So I'll give her a few minutes to get ready for that, and I will read a selection from my devotional book, Equipped, Ephesians 6 Devotionals. This one is called Gospel of Peace. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. John 14:27. And those are definitely words that we need to hear today, aren't they? Horatio G. Spafford lost his 4 daughters when the Ville du Havre ocean liner sank after colliding with another ship. His wife, Anna, was able to escape and notify him of the disaster. Later, while sailing across the ocean, the captain called Horatio to his cabin to inform him that they were over the place where the accident happened. According to some accounts, sometime during that voyage, Mr. Spafford penned the words to the hymn, "It is well with my soul." What is your definition of peace? Is it the absence of trouble? A feeling that disappears when circumstances change? Or is it something that endures through changing seasons and challenges? Are you ready for anything that life throws at you? In Ephesians 6:15, we are exhorted to have our feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Thayer's Greek lexicon expresses this phrase as readiness of mind with the promptitude and alacrity which the gospel produces. In other words, the gospel of peace enables us to be cheerfully ready to act promptly. What is the gospel? The Greek word euangelion means good message or good news. The Apostle Paul says, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. For in the gospel, a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith." Romans 1:16 and 17. The gospel is the good news of salvation that is available to us because Christ died for our sins and rose again. So, why is it referred to as the gospel of peace? According to Strong's Concordance, the Greek word means 1, peace, quietness, rest, or set at one again. The outline of biblical usage explains that this word is used to describe the way that leads to salvation, resulting in a tranquil state of a soul assured of its salvation through Christ, and so fearing nothing from God and content with its earthly lot of whatsoever sort that is. So it's just a little bit of Gospel of Peace, one of the devotionals from my Equipped book. Like I mentioned before, I am going to bring Julie on and interview her because she's not available tomorrow night. And I see that Skip has joined us as well. So we'll do Julie's interview, then maybe I'll let Phil do a reading, and then we'll bring Skip on and do his interview. We'll have a full schedule tonight. So welcome, Julie.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for letting me know that you're not available tomorrow, so we can do
sorry about that. Something came up and the family thing, so.
Those things happen. I know all too well.
For this time of year.
Yes. So Julie, do you call yourself a writer? Why or why not?
I do. I've been writing my whole life. I felt like I was a writer. I feel like I was sort of born with the ability to put my thoughts into writing. And I have a degree in English, which was I actually have a double major, but the English one was fairly simple. The other one's in theater, which was fun too. But so yeah, I'm definitely a writer. This is my first book, Weathering the Grief Storm, but I've been writing, blogging, writing marketing copy, wrote all through college. And I will say that there was one particular teacher, Mrs. Gano, in high school, who taught me how to write a proper essay. And we're actually friends on Facebook now. And I have told her more than once that her class influenced my entire life, because I really learned how to properly write, thesis statement, supporting statements, closing statement from her. So, yeah.
I'm sure she was very pleased to hear that from you.
She always says, "Oh, well, I was one of your teachers," but
she's humbled. So you've told us a little bit about yourself. Is there anything else you want to tell us about your early years or growing up and how it affected your writing?
I'm from a broken home. My parents divorced when I was in 4th grade, and I was raised by a very strong, powerful, single mom, woman of the 70s. And I think that definitely impacted me in a big way. I feel like I am the resilient human being that I am because of my mom. Really, I didn't have much of a relationship with my dad. And I started professionally writing I wasn't being paid, but when I was, I want to say 10 or 11, right around there, I had a article. I lived in Bend, Oregon, and I had a column in the Bend Chronicle newspaper called Little Recipes for Little Cooks. And I still have the newspapers. I wrote a column then. So, I think that writing, I can't imagine my life without being able to write. I think I actually said the other night, it's a process. I've never kept a daily journal, but whenever I'm feeling strong emotion about anything, the first thing I want to do is write. So. Oh, you're muted.
I was saying that's amazing to be a professional writer from the age of 10. You got a really early start.
I did. I definitely did. Yep. And I really, if I could write full time, and I'm doing a lot of copywriting now as a part of my vocation, that's what makes me happiest for sure.
Great. So other than your book, what other projects have you done? You mentioned theater. Have you written any plays or?
I haven't. I've directed a lot of plays, but when I started my online business in 2009, I was a speaker trainer in the direct sales industry prior to bringing my business online at the end of 2008. And one of the ways that I built my audience was through blogging, and I wrote 3 blog posts a week about my industry, and I worked in what they call the home party plan part of that industry. So I have this whole, giant catalog of blog posts about that. And like I said, I've done a lot of marketing, like sales page copy, marketing email copy for both myself and my clients. And I'm actually still doing that. That's a big part of what I do now as well. And then when my husband died in 2016, when he was diagnosed in 2013 with metastatic melanoma, I started writing a blog called Love Trumps Cancer, which was sort of the hashtag that we came up with. And I wrote all through his cancer journey, and then for another couple of years after he died. And that's really, those were the seeds for the book. People kept saying, you should turn this into a book. And so, I've had a lot of I also was part of one of the compilation books that you guys have been talking about, where I was one of I think 15 or 20 authors. And it was such an impact on me. I can't even remember the name of the series, but I wrote a chapter in that book called "The
When
Myth
Grace
of
Found Me."
Overwhelm. Pardon me?
When Grace Found Me.
That's not. I wasn't part of that. It was a different one.
Oh, not that one. Okay, sorry.
It was a different one. But yeah, I wrote a chapter called "The Myth of Overwhelm." It was a book for business owners and business people.
Okay.
So I'm also a certified life and business coach, and I've used that through a lot of my career for sure. I think coaching is an amazing model, and you really learn a lot about how to listen and help other people come up with their own solutions. And so,
Thank you. So what advice do you have for people who are new to writing?
I think the best advice that I've gotten, there's a really great book called The Writer's Way. And really what it's about is just writing something every day. And, really a book is just certainly I'm proof that a book is a compilation of a bunch of small things you've written all put together. And so the best advice, if you want to start writing or you think you might want to write a book, is to just sit down at least once a day and write something, even if it's only a few paragraphs. The cool thing about the book, The Writer's Way, is it has prompts, and there are a lot of different books that you can get that'll help you in that endeavor to really just start writing, start a discipline of writing, start writing every single day. But I highly recommend that. The other thing that I will tell you, and like I said, I have a degree in English. I've been writing my whole life, but I had never written a book. And I wanted this book to be a bit of a, it definitely was my story, our story and my story, but I also wanted it to be a bit of a blueprint for getting through any difficult time in your life. And in order to write the book so that it could be, impactful, so that I defined my process and could maybe even potentially teach that process at a workshop or an online course, I hired a book coach whose specialty was that, basically helping me really go through the process that I, went through with my husband and learn what, not just learn, but like define what that process was. And that became the Thrive process, which is the third part of my book. So I highly recommend getting help. It was a big investment financially for me, but I really will never regret doing it, because I know that the book would have been different had I not hired him, and not nearly as impactful.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I have had wonderful coaches, and they have made a huge difference in my life.
For sure.
So what future writing projects do you have in mind?
Like I said, right now I'm doing a lot of copywriting for other people. One of the gifts that I discovered in the last couple of months, as I've really stepped into copywriting as more of a vocation, is not only am I good at putting thoughts down in writing, but I'm also really good at taking something that someone else has said or something that someone else has written that maybe isn't very clear, and zeroing in on exactly what they want to say and clarifying that. And I think that's a little bit different skill. So that's really, for me, a lot of the writing I'm doing now is honestly for other people. I would love to actually do some ghost writing. I think that would be something I would very much enjoy and that I would be good at as well. So if anybody out there listening wants a ghostwriter to get your book down, look me up.
It sounds like you have a lot of ideas, and it'll be interesting to see where God leads you.
For sure.
So I believe that this is your website for your book, right?
Yes, that is the website for the book.
Is there any other place that you like to connect with people, or if they go there, they'll find you on other platforms?
I am on, there is a Facebook page for the book. I'm not super active there, but it is there. And I'm pretty sure, I'm just going to look it up. I think it's Weathering the Grief Storm, and it's a Facebook page. So you can certainly connect with me there or through Facebook. And it's just Julie at weatheringthegriefstorm.com is, if you want to email me. That's the best place to find me. I'm very proud of this website. My stepdaughter, John's daughter, is a web designer, and she did the website for me, and she did a beautiful job.
That's great to have expertise within the family, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it feels a little bit better when someone who loves you is doing that kind of work for you.
Is there anything else that you would like to tell us, Julie?
Not really. I have a reading prepared if you want me to do a little bit of that tonight.
Sure.
Okay, it's not very long. This is a pretty short one. So this is from a chapter called Moving Forward. I love this quote by Gilda Radner. I wanted a perfect ending. Now I've learned the hard way that some poems don't rhyme and some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Life is about not knowing. having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it without knowing what's going to happen next. Delicious ambiguity. I had no idea how very true this quote would be for me. I was discovering that life did go on and every day got easier to breathe and laugh and plan for the future. Some days the ambiguity of my current life actually did feel delicious, even spacious. Other days I couldn't help but wistfully think back to the plan I thought I had for my life with a beautiful man who wasn't perfect, but was perfect for me, who loved me more than I loved myself most of the time, who had my back always, and whom I was supposed to laugh and love with until we both grew old and gray. On those days, I felt robbed. So much had changed for me since John had died. There had been times I hadn't known how I would survive one more day. I never wallowed in self-pity or felt sorry for myself, but I also didn't fight the sadness when it hit. I learned early on that it's futile to do that, and I knew it was part of my healing process. I leaned into it, let myself feel everything, and then blew my nose and moved on. I was strong most days and weak once in a while. I didn't argue with what I was feeling or even try to understand why I was feeling it. It didn't really matter. Grief is a challenging journey and a difficult one to navigate. One minute, it's a beautiful sunny drive on a straight road through scenery you love looking at, and the next, it's sharp, steep curves that sneak up on you and force you to hit the brakes and hold on for dear life. The one thing that I've learned about this journey is that I have to keep driving. There's no turning around and going back. But on the particularly hard days, when I was pulled to remember so much from our past, I found myself wishing that U-turns were permitted and that I could go back. Oh, you're muted.
You loud.
What was that? No U-turns allowed. Yeah, actually, that was the name of the blog post that I took that from. No U-turns allowed.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing so much about your journey with grief and how God met you there and took you not only through the grief, but to the other side and led you into another good relationship. So,
definitely. Yeah. And my husband, my late husband told me the week before he died that he was going to send me the perfect person. He said, you are a partnership person and I'm going to send you the perfect person. And I thought, okay, I don't want to hear this. But
whatever.
Yeah, the way that I met my husband, my current husband, Mark, has been we're both pretty convinced that John had a hand in that. And, as I said last night, loving someone, a widow or widower, is a whole different story than loving almost anyone else, because there's this part of their heart that still belongs to someone else. And he's just amazing. I'm very, very, very lucky. I feel like I've hit the lottery twice in my life, honestly, with my new husband, because I never thought I'd ever find anyone who loved me the way John did. And he promised and he delivered like he always did. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank
and
you.
thanks for accommodating the changes in my schedule. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. All right. So, Phil, are you ready with your reading? All right.
So this is another reading from my book, Letters from Uncle Dave. I read a letter before that was kind of a turning point. They were getting ready to leave Fort Bragg and cross the ocean and fight the war. And he was writing a letter back to his folks, trying to assure them that he was going to be okay, or that he was not going to do anything, dangerous that he could avoid. It was a tone of a letter where you're about to go into the gauntlet. But this letter I've chosen here is quite the opposite. It's a letter that is talking about a leave he went on, and it's to his brother. And he writes about a variety of things, but it kind of demonstrates that he was big on relationships, and he had strong relationships with his siblings, his parents, with others. And so this is kind of a little more lighthearted. And I mention in here Herb Specter, a friend of his, and he grew up with. And I'll mention it as I read through. But Herb went on to be a very accomplished animator in Hollywood, and he was in charge of such projects as the Lorax um, and the Grinch and that kind of stuff. He was like the chief animator for some of those. But anyway, let me read this. Here's the introduction and then the letter. In the next letter, Dave mentions that Lonnie, his brother, was sent home on leave after his ship was sunk. He also gives great detail about his trip to New York City, where he was able to see his childhood friend, Herb Specter, who was stationed in New York City in the Army Signal Corps. Herb went on to become an accomplished animator in Hollywood after the war. So this is March 5th, 1943. Dear Jewel, I was sure glad to get your letter and hear that Lonnie is home okay. It's the first I heard about it. I don't know why they didn't send me a letter right away from home, but you know how they are. I wrote a letter yesterday telling them to see the Red Cross to get in touch with Lonnie. But by the time the letter gets there, he will have been home a week already. I sure would have liked to seen him, but I guess I won't till this war is over. I bet he really had an interesting time for a while, although enough to last a lifetime. If we keep knocking off the Japs like we have been, the war won't last too long. I had a real vacation in New York for 8 days. It was all over the place in the subways and the L's. I went to all the theaters around Times Square and Rockefeller Center. If you remember Herb Specter, he's in the Army Signal Corps and lives in a hotel across the street from Madison Square Garden. That's what I really call Army life, living in a hotel, eating in restaurants, and riding buses to work, all on the government. Seems too good to be true. They work in the old Paramount studio on Long Island City and make training films for the Army. Anyhow, New York City was swell. I went to the top of the Empire State Building, but it was so cloudy I couldn't see more than a half a mile in any direction. The subways really are something too. The people go nuts when they get near one and get a terrific urge to crowd and push and enjoy it. I always stayed away from them, waiting for the next train if there was much of a mob. Radio City Music Hall was quite a show. A good picture plus a symphony orchestra and a stage show featuring the Rockettes, the best chorus I've ever seen, and all for 27 cents. That's all I had to pay for any show except 2, and I saw more than 10. I paid $3.85 for a seat at the Olson and Johnson show, and it was sure worth it. And I paid $1.65 to see the ice show produced by Sonia Henney. But it wasn't as good as the show I saw at the Pan Pacific Auditorium in Los Angeles. I also went to all the best-known nightclubs in Manhattan. I didn't get drunk once, though, but I did feel pretty good a couple of times. New York is a nice place for a visit, but I wouldn't want to stay here. I like a more open city like Los Angeles. We had a couple of tests here for all the non-coms in the battalion, and I came out second highest in our company and on the first test and on the highest on the second test. I think I have the best average for both tests in the battalion, but I'm not sure. Makes me feel pretty good. Remember me telling you about our dumb staff sergeant a while back? Well, his scores were the lowest on both tests. I hope they get rid of him soon. I see by the newspapers that they aren't going to take married men for a while, so that should make sure you feel pretty good. In my opinion, I think the Army is big enough now to win, and that all the new men are just for a reserve in case. Some of the men in our company made a jump in Florida this morning after a 4-hour ride. Wish I could have been there. Maybe next time. Well, old kid, I guess I'll close now, right soon, as I may leave here soon. Good luck, Dave. So he wrote colorful letters and maintained his relationships. So,
Letters, there's nothing like letters to give us a window into a
yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
Okay.
All right, so we have Skip Mondragon with us tonight. Welcome, Skip.
Well, so good to see you, Ruth.
I'm glad that you were able to join us. I'm just asking, are you able to join us tomorrow as well or not?
If I can rearrange my schedule, I will be able to join you tomorrow.
Okay.
I committed to doing something, but I can see if I can get a little leeway in the time I need to be there so that I can try to join you tomorrow.
Okay, no pressure. I just thought if you knew for sure that you were going to be here tomorrow, we would delay your interview. But if you're not sure, we will continue on with your interview tonight. And then if you're with us tomorrow, then you can come and do a reading for us.
Great. Great.
So, do you call yourself a writer, Skip?
Absolutely. Anybody who writes is a writer.
Short and to the point. Tell us about yourself, your early years, maybe if you want, and your work experience and what led you to write.
I'm the third of 8 children born of parents of meager means. I have 2 older sisters, a younger sister, and 4 younger brothers. I was bullied as a child, came from a traumatic childhood. My father came back a broken man from the Korean War. The man that went to war was not the man that came back from war. He suffered from mental illness and alcoholism. Unfortunately, he was very violent when he drank. My oldest sister, Roma, tells us that we would go and hide when he'd come home because we didn't know which dad was coming home, the kind, loving, gentle dad or the angry, violent dad. Thankfully, I don't remember that, but that's what she tells us. My mother later divorced him, but he was in and out of our lives before that time, and we'd only see him a few times a year. He spent most of his time in and out of the Veterans Administration hospital being treated. I was very small for my age, bullied, and inept at any kind of sports. In my younger years, you basically got clout. You had street cred, if you will, by being an athlete or being a brainiac. And I was not living up to my potential academically in those days. And I certainly didn't have any credibility as an athlete. I could not run, jump, kick, catch, throw a ball of any form. Heck, I failed at tetherball. But in the 8th grade, I discovered wrestling, and that changed a lot of things in my life. I later, so I started off in wrestling and went on, even though it took 2 years to win my first wrestling match, I went on and graduated from high school as an honorable mention All-American. Later, I got the bug at the age of 56 to compete again and won a National Veterans Wrestling Championship. I completed a career in the Army, 26 years, retired as a colonel, and then did some work with a federally qualified health center caring for the medically underserved. Father of 5, grandfather of 4, been married to a magnificent woman, Sherry, for 40 years. I did become a casualty of depression my last year in the Army, and that out of that recovery, it became the genesis of my book as I began to tell my story and the lessons learned along the way.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself. You have quite the history there. And I'm so glad that you are willing to share some of the pain that God took you through and the healing that He brought into your life. Because there are so many people around us, especially now with COVID and everything that's happening in our world. So many struggle with mental health and depression.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Are there any tips that you would give people who know somebody who's struggling?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost is to be present and not to poo-poo the symptoms. I think that's so important, and not to compare your symptoms. Oh, I felt depressed at one time. I mean, clinical depression, you are in a deep, deep, dark pit. Life is gray. It's like walking through life in black and white, mired in this deep, dark. For me, it was like walking down in this deep pit where there's no sunlight. I'm slogging through a foot of mud, my head in a cloud, feeling helpless, hopeless, and beat up, beat down, and broken. That's lonely and isolated. That's uh, with so many other symptoms heaped upon that. That's the sense of depression. So first and foremost is to be present and just willing to be present with them in their suffering, but getting them to help. All of us need help from time to time, and I think especially with men, there's a reluctance to admit, I'm hurting, I'm struggling, I need help, and the willingness to get them to help, to say, hey, let's get you some help. Let's call somebody. Let's take you to somebody, but let's get some help for you. So getting them to professional help is so essential. And then helping them build that support network. And there's an array of other practical things that I could spend a long time talking about there. I've outlined a lot of them in my book, but I could literally spend hours talking about things that people could do to help themselves or that others could do to help those who are struggling.
Thanks. Phil asked a question. Was there
Sure.
a specific incident or deployment that caused your depression?
Oh, that's a great question, Phil. Phil, it was an accumulation of traumas and things that occurred throughout my life, the traumatic events of my childhood, incidents from teenage years and young adulthood, and that accumulation, being a soldier, the things you see and do, treating dying and mangled soldiers. I was away from my family for over 3.5 years when deployed. I spent a year and a half in combat zones. All of these accumulated deaths from family members that you don't have time and space to properly grieve over. And then it was this perfect storm those last several months or that last year plus in the Army. Um, uh, Things were going wrong in my department. I fixated on those, had these horrible negative thoughts, what we call negative ruminations. You don't deserve to be a colonel. You're a fake. You let your department down. You let your family down. These thoughts would just play over and over in my mind. Then insomnia, where it got so bad I might sleep an hour or two at night at best, or the nights I could fall asleep. Within a couple hours, I'd wake up wide awake and couldn't fall asleep. Anxiety, um, so many other things going on in my life. 3 surgeries. Well, actually, yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 3 surgeries in 7 months, and all of this disrupted everything in my life. So it's this perfect storm, plus the uncertainty of things related to leaving the Army. After 26 years, you're getting ready to depart the Army. So it was all of that past, and then you add to it those recent events that were going on those 9 months before I was diagnosed. So it was all of this that was heaped upon it. And my tough guy image. See, I had been bullied as a kid. I became a wrestler, and now I'm a tough guy. Add to that, I'm a soldier. I've been deployed. I've been in combat zones. I'm a colonel. Uh, I've been the chief medical officer of a hospital. All of these things that I take on in terms of that image, and now I'm struggling. And this whole image of a wrestler is this idea we don't give up, we just push through it. There's a term I use, gut it out, that no matter how hard it is, no matter how hard your lungs are burning, your muscles ache, and everything in your being says give up, you just keep pushing through it, whether you're training or out there competing on the mat. And that was my mentality. I just need to push through this. I need to work harder. I just need to keep pushing through this. Meanwhile, I'm sinking farther and farther and farther down into that darkness and not being able to see, okay, this is what's going on with you, Skip. Your mood is becoming more blue, the insomnia, the negative thinking, the withdrawal from others, the anxious anxiety to go with it, the physical somatic symptoms, and on, the impaired cognition, so many other things that went on, the loss of confidence, the indecision, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this going on, I couldn't see it because I'm a tough guy, pushing, pushing, pushing. It was the perfect storm heaped upon all that past trauma. Great question.
So would you say that generally speaking, depression happens when, I know for stress, there's stress and then there's stress, right? There's Most of us can handle one or two stresses in our lives, but do you think it's the heaping on that you talked about that generally causes depression, or does it
It,
vary?
it's variable based on different people, and certainly there's a genetic predisposition.
Mm,
My father, I'm convinced, had bipolar disorder with where he would become manic, just
mhm,
hyper and so forth, and do erratic things to where he would be horribly morose and lock himself into a dark room and not come out
mm,
of it for days on end. And so that genetic predisposition, I had that. Plus, when I look back in the writing of my book, I realized, oh, there were times in my life when I was depressed.
mm,
I just didn't recognize it as such. Plus,
right.
somebody asked me about 2 years ago when I was on my first podcast, well, have you always suffered from depression? And nobody had ever asked me that question.
Mm,
I paused and I thought, and I go, huh, I've always had this low level, what I call a melancholy, this thread that's just run through my life.
mhm,
And so there's just that low baseline level that has always been there. And
right.
then with these spikes that have occurred at different points in my life, but I didn't understand that till I looked back retrospectively and understood, oh, I was depressed after I lost the state championship
Mm,
there as a senior. Oh, I was depressed as a freshman in college. Oh, I was depressed after that young woman I loved and that relationship fell apart. And so these different points in my life, I realized, oh, no wonder I struggled so much after those. I was depressed, but I
mhm,
didn't see that. Nobody else really understood that either, what was
mm,
going on with me. So um, it's variable. Certainly, it can be a major stress, a
mhm,
death of a loved one, a traumatic event, or an accumulation of stresses related to also the genetic predisposition that people have. And then you
mhm.
think about what's going on in COVID, this isolation that we see
Yes,
there. We are made for human connection. We are
yes.
made to be in contact face to face, uh, hand to hand, cheek to cheek, if you will. And now you get people who communicating like this over a screen,
Mhm,
and they do that for weeks on end or months on end in some cases without this human connection.
mhm,
And that takes its toll. That takes a
mhm,
powerful toll. And then you think about in our young people, there some of the things there that those social networks they rely on. And then the disruption to their lives, some of these kids
mhm,
that were seniors, they didn't have senior prom, senior
mhm,
homecomings,
mhm,
graduations, other events, that didn't take place in their lives
mhm.
because of COVID.
Right.
Funerals.
You
Mhm.
couldn't have but a few people that attended a funeral, so they're having a virtual funeral. You couldn't gather to comfort one another in person when you had that. Weddings again,
Right.
and other celebrations again, the restrictions and the lack of
Mhm.
human connection and the toll that takes on people. So when you have
Mhm.
people that are already have a predisposition to something like depression and you isolate them,
Mhm.
and then the anxiety and the uncertainty related to COVID and what's going on in the world. And let's say now they've unemployed and they're worried
Mhm.
about rent, they're worried about food. How am I going to care for my child? How am I going to pay for my car and my insurance? And on and on. You start heaping these
Mhm.
concerns. You can see how
Mhm.
somebody could get depressed, or you think about that youngster. Oh,
Mhm.
when am I going to see my friends? Gee, we
Mhm.
missed our graduation, and all this uncertainty. And I would point this out in our 14 to 24-year-olds, or in some cases, some statistics show our 10 to 24-year-olds, suicide is the number two killer, the number two
Mhm.
cause of death. And undiagnosed depression in those age groups is the leading cause, a contributor, if you will,
Right.
of suicide.
Mhm.
So, uh, undiagnosed, and I should say, and untreated.
Right.
So, it's a profound problem in our society.
Mhm.
Profound.
Mhm. Yes. Well, thank you for shedding light on it and for sharing some of your experiences. So, you chose to share your experiences in writing.
Yes.
What advice do you have for someone who may have gone through a difficult experience and is thinking about writing about it?
I I would say sit down and write, just like Julie talked about. I can't tell you the number of these books I have filled over over the years. I like a simple composition book. I I will pick these up. I can get them for $1 a piece, and just writing. So begin to collect your thoughts. That's what I did as I began to recover. I felt God had called me to share my story. And so I began to write things, lessons I had learned, and lessons I was learning with the intention of sharing those. And it was with the intention of speaking to others. And I did that. And but also then that became the genesis for my book. And so it was writing those things down and then having the opportunity when I won a writing contest to get a publication deal and have the help I needed to write the book. But it's sitting down and writing. And then, as you know, writing the book is your Herculean task. And you've got to just make yourself do it. Just sit down and write.
Writing is not always fun, right? There's discipline involved.
Now there'll be those magical times when you'll get lost in it, and you may I would sometimes, and I would think, "Oh, I'm gonna write for the next 2 hours," and 6 hours later, I'm still writing because I was lost in it. But there's other times it was just excruciating to sit down there and say, "Oh, where?" Kind of stare at the screen, look at your notes, stare at the screen.
Yes.
Every
Living in
writer experiences that. It's like, "Oh, okay."
one thing I found, and I different people work differently, but I find that having an outline really helps me because if I get stuck with point 1 or point 4, I can skip over to point 6 and work on that and
Exactly,
then come back.
exactly.
So,
Right. And
yeah.
that's one of the beauties of it. You have that outline. You don't have to write sequentially.
No.
You can bounce around and say, okay, I'm going to go to this section
and write that, because you can tie it together because you know where
Mhm.
you're going.
Right.
And sometimes rookie writers think, well, I've got to write this all in sequence. No, you don't. You know what your material is. You can write and what my publisher kept saying, this is what you write first. This is the most important thing. What's on your back cover will drive everything else. So
Mhm.
if you can get this really tight
Right.
and reflecting what your book is all about, that back cover blurb, then everything else flows from that. So once you have that and have that very, very, very clear, then you write your book by, like you said, you have your outline, which really the big outline is your table of contents, if you will, and then your subheadings from that in your chapter, and there's your outline. I mean, voila. You can write.
It doesn't have to be complicated.
No,
So
but I would
go ahead.
piggyback on what Julie said, though. If you want a book to be professional and you want it to be really well done, you need a professional editor. You don't want to try to
Yes.
do that on your own, because it's going to come across, unless you are a professional editor, it's going to come across as that it's not professional. And you will see that in some people self-publish. You have seen
I'll
that. I
tell
have
you
seen,
a secret.
others have seen that.
Even if you are a professional editor, you
It's
still
somebody
need
else to do
an
it.
editor.
You
Because we're
get
too
people.
close to our own work.
Yes, indeed. How many times do we read our own work? We read it out loud, we reread it, we check it, we spell check it, and we still miss a few things. It's like, oh, I missed that. Oh, darn it. And you read it again. You read, oh, how did I miss that? I went over, my editor went over, I read it. But look, it's wrong.
Yes. Those proofreaders definitely earn their money. And
Right.
and there's some that are better than others. Do you have any future writing projects in mind?
I do. I have an anthology that I'll be contributing to related to the TED Talk that I just gave last week. I gave a TED Talk that was entitled Tough Guys Are an Endangered Species. And it's related to my book and this whole idea of men not being able to identify, express, and share their feelings, and the dire consequences of that in relation to mental illness and the most dire, suicide, and the importance for men to learn to reach out and connect. So I'm going to do a chapter for this anthology, but I have another book in me, and I'm debating whether that's going to be Wrestling Bullies is Not for Wimps, because my current book is Wrestling Depression is Not for Wimps, but whether that second book is going to be Wrestling Bullies is Not for Wimps or some other book. Wrestling Bullies Not for Wimps has been the one that has been there, but I'm not sure that's going to be the next one or something else at this point.
Well, you'll have to keep in touch and let me know when you have your next book written.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I have your, I believe this is, if my computer will cooperate.
Okay.
There, that's your LinkedIn. Oh, it was there and then it disappeared. There it is. LinkedIn profile. Is LinkedIn the best place for somebody to find you, or is there
I think
somewhere
that
else?
would be the best place, or my website, but LinkedIn is a great place to start. Sure.
And what's your website called?
Wrestlingisnotforwimps.com.
Oh,
The
that makes sense.
www.wrestlingisnotforwimps.com.
Wrestling is not for wimps.com. Okay. Ah, where did it go? I've got too many banners here. Well, I'll put it up a little bit later, maybe. Do you have you have something to read from your book tonight?
Oh, I do. I would love to read this passage. This is the conclusion, towards the conclusion of my book. I experienced a broken spirit when I faced the powerful and relentless foe of depression in 2014. This behemoth slammed me on my back, left me dazed, confused, and disheartened. My strength was sapped, confidence depleted, and hope ripped from my soul. I was fearful, fretful, and faced countless nights of fitful sleep. My joie de vivre dried up. I felt isolated from God and others and misunderstood. My prayers seemed to bounce off the ceiling and go no farther. Guilt, shame, and self-condemnation plagued me day and night. I was anxious and felt a trembling within and tried to conceal the noticeable tremor of my hands. I lacked the emotional energy to reach out and care for others. The inability to retain what I read, recall familiar names and medical information caused me to fear early onset dementia. My body was weary and the aches and pains from old injuries were magnified. Old hurts, slights, injustices, and rejections were relived and left me bitter, resentful, and struggling to forgive. Doom and gloom replaced optimism. I suffered in body, mind, and spirit, and felt like I was abandoned and stuck in a mire of a deep, dark pit. Recovery was slow, halting, and even painful at times, and required the help of compassionate and skillful professionals, medications, tender loving care from my wife and others, and countless prayers. It also required daily renewed efforts, however feeble at first, to embrace healthy practices for my body, mind, and spirit. I am still on this journey, and each day I awaken with a humble heart of gratitude. One of my favorite prayers before I roll out of bed is, "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad from it." That's from Psalm 118, verse 24. My prayer and hope for you, my readers, is that you will persist in your quest day by day to overcome and vanquish the ravages of depression and rebuild your body, mind, and spirit. May you be blessed with a clear and optimistic mind, a courageous and grateful spirit, and a vibrant and healthy body. My struggle and recovery from depression has become a source of growth as I mine the treasures of that dark time. The fateful decision to accept and embrace my pain and ask God, "What would you have me learn from this? How can I use it to help others?" became an avenue to share my story and the genesis of this book. Thank you for allowing me to share some of my story with you. Wrestling is not for wimps. Its Spartan-like training prepares wrestlers for hand-to-hand combat, fought on small arenas, mats that are 23 feet or less in diameter, that leaves its combatants bruised, bloodied, and exhausted. It pushes them past perceived limits and demands all-encompassing devotion of body, mind, and spirit. Hotly contested matches often come down to what I call the G factor, guts. Guts, that inner essence deep within our core that refuses to yield and determines, "I'll do whatever it takes to win." I pray, my readers, you too have made this commitment, and each day resolutely recommit yourself to regain your health and well-being. The training will be tough and at times lonely and even painful. Seek out your coaches, teammates, and supporters. You'll need them on this journey. Persist, accept that there will be setbacks. Don't give up. To the victor go the spoils. Wrestling depression is not for wimps.
No, it's not for wimps. Thank you for sharing some of your story and for reminding people that there is hope and you can be victorious, but you do need help when you have depression.
Yes, indeed. Don't suffer in silence. Go get help.
Great. So I'm just going to add Phil back to the stream here. We'll have a few minutes of discussion. Phil, any other questions that you want to ask Skip?
Yeah, what weight class did you wrestle in?
I wrestled 112 pounds in high school, 118 in college, anywhere from 123 to 127 plus about 127.5 with the veterans. So I'm a big bruiser, as you can see, Phil.
Well, I didn't go out for wrestling in high school, but my freshman year in high school, my PE teacher was the wrestling coach. So
Oh, is that right?
So guess what we did most of the time?
Yeah, I can't
And-
imagine, Phil.
Yeah, and I wasn't good at anything, but I've had a great appreciation for wrestling ever since, and I believe that a wrestler can handle him or herself if they have to.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people might not think that, but I believe it's for sure.
You
Yeah.
bet. Yeah, that was an 85 pounder in 8th grade and a 95 pounder in 9th grade.
Okay. Yeah. Well, when I went into high school, I weighed 99 pounds and didn't put on that much weight, but yeah, I was little then. And then what was it, the freshman 40 in college?
So you grew. See, I
Oh
stayed
yeah.
the same size. See, I didn't grow.
Okay. No, I ended up when I was 39 years old. They said, okay, this is enough. I weighed 225 pounds, and I
Whoa.
joined Weight Watchers.
Good for you. Good for you. That's important to take good care of yourself.
But I really appreciate your words.
Thank you, Phil.
And you know, people, the thing that you said several times is you don't recognize what's going on, and you need to get help. And a lot of times people don't recognize what's going on and they don't seek help.
Right.
So,
It's this insidious disease that comes upon you, and it just brings you into this vortex that just, you sink into this, and people that you talk with other sufferers, and they're thinking, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? Why am I feeling like this? What's wrong?" And they don't understand what's going on in many cases. I was talking to a man that he FaceTimed me, actually. This man, we wrestled each other back 74 in college. I was at the University of Notre Dame and he was at Duquesne University. And we wrestled one another. And he remembered me. And he looked me up on Facebook. We're Facebook friends. And he's been following. I do some Facebook Live posts and he watches those. But when I was in Vancouver last week, he FaceTimed me and we chatted. And he mentioned the fact that he went through this period of depression. And he said, I don't know where it came from. And he had turned 65 and so forth. And then I was thinking, and we were talking, I said, well, may have something. He said, maybe it's because my age, turning 65. And I said, well, might have been related to this pandemic too. The fact that you're isolated and not out there interacting with others, for other reasons too. But it's this insidious thing. Like he was saying, I don't know what happened. I don't know why that happened to me. Things are good in my life, but I was there. And I couldn't understand why I was there. And I think that's with a lot of people. But one major stressor, the accumulation of stressors, the stressors or the trauma from the past that we haven't resolved, genetic predisposition, things going on in your world, in your environment that suddenly go into a tailspin. So many things that can contribute to depression, even a major illness. People who have cardiac surgery, for instance, or people with diabetes, or some other illnesses, cancer, for instance, or a stroke, their rates of depression are much higher too.
Well, again, thank you for shedding light on this dark subject. I appreciate you being with us.
My pleasure.
And I hope that we will see you tomorrow. But if not, I wish you the best of the season and blessings in your life.
Well, thank you, Ruth, and God bless you. And thank you so much for allowing me to share some of my story.
You're very welcome. Take care, everyone. We will see you back tomorrow.
Adios.